My life as I knew it ended when I was 19. Standing in the doorway of my childhood home, I watched as my father's new wife, Eleanor, methodically removed every trace of my mother from our family photos. "These old pictures clash with our new decor," she explained without looking up, her red lacquered nails working the back of a silver frame. The photograph, my parents on their wedding day, disappeared into a cardboard box marked "Donate." In that moment, I realized Eleanor wasn't just redecorating our house, she was erasing my past. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Rebecca Wilson, and this is the story of how I reclaimed my life from the woman who spent years trying to delete my existence. My mother, Sarah, had been gone for barely 8 months when Dad introduced Eleanor as someone special during what should have been a simple dinner at our favorite restaurant. I remember staring at my pasta, suddenly tasteless, as this stranger with perfect blonde hair and a calculating smile reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "I know we're going to be the best of friends," she'd said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness that made my skin crawl. Dad seemed transformed in her presence, laughing too loudly at her jokes, agreeing with her every opinion. The grief that had hollowed his eyes since Mom's cancer diagnosis was temporarily masked by this new infatuation. I wanted to be happy for him, I truly did. But something about Eleanor felt wrong from the beginning, like finding a wasp in your favorite sweater. Within 3 months, Eleanor had moved into our home, bringing her 11-year-old twin daughters, Chloe and Zoe. The twins were mirror images of their mother, physically beautiful but with something cold behind their smiles. They took the guest bedroom across from mine, immediately complaining about the small space and how their previous home had been much nicer. Eleanor consoled them by promising they would make improvements soon. Those improvements began with my mother's garden. The roses she had tenderly cultivated for 15 years were ripped out to make way for a hot tub Eleanor claimed would increase property value. When I protested, my father pulled me aside. "Rebecca, please. Eleanor is trying to make this house work for all of us now. Your mother would understand." But Mom wouldn't have understood. She'd spent years nurturing those roses, telling me stories about how each variety represented different moments in her life with Dad. The garden was just the beginning. Within 6 months, our home became unrecognizable. Mom's antique furniture disappeared, replaced by Eleanor's modern glass and chrome pieces. Family photos were either removed entirely or rearranged to include Eleanor and the twins, creating a visual narrative that suggested they had always been part of our lives. My childhood bedroom was the only space that remained untouched, my personal museum to a life that no longer existed outside those 4 walls. During family dinners, Eleanor would speak over me, redirect conversations when I started talking about Mom, or simply act as if I hadn't spoken at all. The twins followed her lead, giggling behind their hands when I mentioned a memory of my mother, or rolling their eyes when I entered a room. Dad noticed none of it, or chose not to. His transformation from grieving widower to devoted husband happened so quickly, it gave me emotional whiplash. "Your father deserves happiness," Eleanor would say whenever I questioned her decisions, weaponizing my love for him. "Don't you want him to be happy?" Of course I did. But did his happiness have to come at the expense of erasing Mom? Did it require me to become invisible in my own home? The summer after my freshman year of college, I came home to find Mom's piano, the one she'd taught me to play on, gone from the living room. In its place stood an elaborate bar cabinet filled with expensive liquors. "Where's the piano?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Oh, that old thing." Eleanor waved dismissively. "It was taking up so much space and no one was using it. I had it donated to a school music program." My hands trembled. "I use it every time I come home." "Well, you're hardly ever here anymore, are you? College keeps you so busy. Besides, the acoustics in this room were terrible. The neighbors could hear that thing for blocks." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I looked to my father, waiting for him to defend me, to acknowledge this violation. He stared at his shoes. Eleanor thought it would be better this way, Becca. And she's right. You're not home much anymore. That night, I cried myself to sleep, clutching the only photograph of Mom playing the piano that I'd managed to hide from Eleanor's purges. The next morning, I discovered that the family vacation we had been planning to the beach house my maternal grandparents had left me in their will had somehow morphed into something else entirely. "We're thinking of having the family reunion at the beach house this year," Eleanor announced over breakfast, not bothering to look up from her phone. "The twins are inviting their cousins, and my sister's family will join us. It'll be the perfect opportunity for everyone to get to know each other better." I nearly choked on my coffee. The beach house? My beach house? Eleanor's gaze flickered up, sharp and cold. "It's a family property, Rebecca. And we're family now." "It's not a family property. My grandparents left it specifically to me in their will." "Well, your father has been handling the taxes and maintenance all these years, hasn't he? Besides, you're too young to manage a property of that value. It makes more sense for us to treat it as a shared family resource." Dad cleared his throat. "Eleanor has put together a wonderful plan for the reunion, Becca. Her brother-in-law is a contractor and has offered to renovate the kitchen while we're there. It's really a win-win." "Renovate without consulting me?" "Dad, Grandma designed that kitchen herself. The house is mine. Legally mine. And I don't want anything changed without my permission." Eleanor's smile tightened. "I think you're being a bit dramatic. It's just a kitchen update, not a demolition. And frankly, that house has been neglected for too long. The appliances are outdated. The countertops are chipped. It needs a modern touch. It's not neglected. I spend every spring break there, maintaining it exactly as Grandma and Grandpa wanted it. A week of dusting and sweeping hardly qualifies as proper maintenance." Eleanor scoffed. "Your father and I have been discussing this for months. The reunion plans are already set." My head spun. Months? They'd been planning this for months without saying a word to me? I turned to my father, searching for any sign of the man who had once taught me to stand up for myself. "Dad, you know the beach house is mine. Mom made sure of that before she died. Her parents wanted it to stay in the family, our family." He wouldn't meet my eyes. "The maintenance costs have been increasing, Becca. The property taxes went up again this year. Eleanor thinks—" "I don't care what Eleanor thinks. This is about what Mom and Grandma and Grandpa wanted. This is about respecting their wishes and my inheritance." Eleanor's face hardened. "Your inheritance? You're 20 years old. You've contributed nothing to the upkeep of that property. Your father and I are the ones investing in its future. If anything, you should be grateful we're not selling it outright." "Selling it? You've discussed selling my beach house?" "It's an option we've considered," Dad mumbled, still not looking at me. "The market in that area is very strong right now." I felt physically ill. The beach house was the last tangible connection I had to my mother's family, the place where we'd spent every summer of my childhood, where Mom had taught me to swim and build sandcastles, where we'd gathered seashells and watched sunsets. The idea of Eleanor's family taking it over, renovating it beyond recognition, possibly even selling it, was unbearable. "I'm going there next weekend," I announced. "Alone. I need to check on things before any reunion happens." "That won't be necessary," Eleanor replied coolly. "We've already arranged for a cleaning service to prepare the house this week. And frankly, Rebecca, your attitude is making me question whether you should join us for the reunion at all." This kind of selfishness and resistance to change is exactly what's been creating tension in our blended family. "Blended family?" I repeated incredulously. "There's been no blending, Eleanor. There's been you systematically erasing my mother and pushing me out of my own home. And now you're trying to take my beach house too?" "No one is taking anything," Dad interjected weakly. "We're just trying to make the most of our family resources." "It's not our resource. The beach house belongs to me. Legally, the deed is in my name." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "Technically, perhaps. But your father has power of attorney until you're 25. That was stipulated in your grandparents' will, wasn't it, Gerald? My father nodded uncomfortably. It was a provision they included, yes, to make sure the property was properly managed until you're older. Something in Eleanor's satisfied expression made my blood run cold. I excused myself from the table and went straight to my room, where I called my mother's best friend, Aunt Julia. Not my actual aunt, but she'd been such a close family friend that I'd called her that since childhood. Julia was a real estate attorney who had helped draft my grandparents' will. "Julia," I said when she answered, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to know exactly what my grandparents' will says about the beach house. Dad is saying he has power of attorney until I'm 25, but that doesn't sound right." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "He has limited financial authority," Julia said carefully. "He can pay the taxes and necessary maintenance costs from the trust they established, but he absolutely cannot sell the property without your consent, nor can he make significant alterations without your approval. The deed is in your name, Rebecca. Your mother made sure of that. What about renovations? Can he authorize renovations? Only repairs necessary to maintain the property's value and functionality. Cosmetic renovations or major changes would require your signature." "Why? What's happening?" I explained the situation, Eleanor's plans for the family reunion, the kitchen renovation, the implications that they'd considered selling the property. Julia's silence on the other end told me everything I needed to know. "Rebecca," she said finally, her voice steel-sharp, "do not sign anything. Do not give verbal permission for any changes. I'm coming to pick you up tomorrow morning, and we're going to the beach house together. I have copies of all the legal documents. If they've taken any steps toward renovations or sale without your consent, we'll address it immediately." That night I overheard Eleanor and my father arguing in their bedroom. Though I couldn't make out all the words, I heard enough: ungrateful, childish, financially irresponsible, and most chillingly, the realtor said we could get at least double what it was worth 5 years ago. The next morning, I packed a small bag and waited on the front porch for Julia. When she arrived, Eleanor appeared in the doorway, arms crossed. "Where do you think you're going?" she demanded. "To my beach house," I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "To make sure it's being properly maintained, as my grandparents wanted. Your father and I haven't approved this trip." "I don't need your approval, Eleanor. I'm 20 years old and the house belongs to me." My father appeared behind her, looking confused and concerned. "Becca, we were going to go as a family next weekend. There's no need for this drama." Julia stepped out of her car and approached the porch. "Hello, Gerald," she said, her professional demeanor firmly in place. "I'm taking Rebecca to inspect her property, as is her right as the legal owner. I have copies of all relevant documents with me, including the specific provisions regarding management of the estate." Eleanor's face flushed with anger. "This is family business. You have no right to interfere." "Actually, as the executor of Catherine and Richard Wilson's estate, I have every right," Julia replied calmly. "And as Rebecca's godmother, I have a moral obligation to ensure her inheritance is protected." My father looked stricken. "Julia, there's no need for this to become adversarial. We're just trying to use the beach house in a way that benefits everyone." "By discussing its sale without informing the legal owner?" Julia raised an eyebrow. "By planning renovations without proper authorization?" "Gerald, you know better than this." Eleanor stepped forward, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Listen carefully. That beach house is a family asset. Rebecca is barely an adult. She has contributed nothing to its upkeep. If you pursue this, you'll regret it." Julia didn't flinch. "Is that a threat, Eleanor?" "It's a reality check. Gerald and I have been married for nearly 2 years. What's his is mine, including his authority over Rebecca's inheritance until she turns 25. That's not how the law works," Julia replied. "And it's certainly not what Catherine and her parents intended when they ensured the beach house would go directly to Rebecca." I picked up my bag and walked toward Julia's car, my heart pounding but my resolve strengthening with every step. Eleanor called after me, her voice sharp with fury. "If you leave now, don't expect to be welcome at the reunion. This is a family event, and you're making it clear where your loyalties lie." I turned back, finally understanding the full scope of what had been happening these past 2 years. "You're right about one thing, Eleanor. This has made it very clear where loyalties lie. Including my father's." Dad flinched as if I'd slapped him. "Becca, please." "I'll see you when I get back, Dad. Or maybe I won't. It depends on what Julia and I find at MY Beach House." As we drove away, I watched my childhood home recede in the side mirror, Eleanor's rigid silhouette still visible in the doorway, my father's slumped form behind her. I didn't know it then, but that moment marked the beginning of my liberation, the first step in reclaiming not just my beach house, but my entire life from the woman who had tried so methodically to erase me from it. The 3-hour drive to the beach house with Julia gave me time to process the shock of what had happened. As we followed the coastal highway, windows down and salt air filling the car, Julia filled in gaps in my understanding that had been deliberately kept from me. "Your mother always worried about something like this," she admitted, eyes fixed on the road ahead. "She made me promise that if anything happened to her, I'd make sure your inheritance was protected." Julia's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. I should have been more present these past 2 years. I knew Eleanor was difficult, but I had no idea she was planning to essentially steal your property. "How could she even think that would work?" I asked, watching seagulls circle above the shoreline. "If the house is legally mine, people like Eleanor count on others being uninformed or too intimidated to stand up for themselves," Julia explained. "Your father has been handling the financial aspects as the will stipulated, but that limited authority can be manipulated if no one's paying attention. My guess is she's been positioning herself to influence any decisions about the property, possibly even having documents drawn up that would give her joint authority." "And Dad's just going along with it?" The pain of his betrayal felt fresh with every mile we drove. Julia sighed. "Gerald was always susceptible to strong personalities. Your mother was his anchor. Without her—" She trailed off, then added more gently, "Grief makes people vulnerable, Rebecca." Eleanor recognized that vulnerability and exploited it. We arrived at the beach house just after noon. The small Cape Cod-style cottage sat perched on a dune overlooking the Atlantic, its weathered blue-gray shingles and white trim exactly as I remembered. My grandparents had purchased it in the 1970s, and my mother had spent every summer of her childhood here, just as I had. It wasn't luxurious by modern standards. No stainless steel appliances or marble countertops, but it was perfect in its simplicity and rich with memories. As we parked in the shell-lined driveway, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. A large dumpster positioned beside the house, and a contractor's truck parked near the back door. "They've already started," I whispered, a cold anger replacing my initial shock. Julia's expression hardened. "Stay in the car for a moment." She retrieved a folder from her briefcase and strode toward the house with purpose. I watched through the windshield as she approached a man in work clothes who was carrying what looked like cabinet doors toward the dumpster. Their conversation was brief but intense. The man gestured toward the house, then pulled out his phone. After a moment, he seemed to deflate, nodding repeatedly at whatever Julia was saying. He signaled to another worker who emerged from the house, and both men began gathering their tools. Julia returned to the car, her face tight with controlled anger. "They were instructed to completely gut the kitchen and start demolition today. Eleanor told them you had approved all the plans." She handed me her phone. "This is what they were going to install." I stared at the screen. Sleek white cabinets, black granite countertops, stainless steel everything. A kitchen that belonged in a glossy magazine, not my grandparents' cozy beach cottage. It would have erased every trace of my grandmother's careful design. The hand-painted blue tiles around the sink, the built-in breakfast nook where Mom and I had played endless games of Scrabble on rainy days. "How did you get them to stop?" I asked. "I showed them the deed and explained that you are the legal owner, not Eleanor or your father. I also mentioned potential legal consequences for proceeding with unauthorized renovations." Julia's smile was small but satisfied. They're leaving now. The foreman said Eleanor paid a deposit, but the final contract hadn't been signed yet, so they're not out much. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. We entered the house together, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me as I stepped into the familiar living room. The comfortable old furniture was still there. The overstuffed couch with its faded floral pattern, my grandfather's reading chair by the window, the bookshelf filled with paperback mysteries and board games. Eleanor hadn't gotten to this room yet. The kitchen, however, told a different story. The contents of the cabinets had been emptied onto the counters in preparation for demolition. My grandmother's collection of blue and white china sat in haphazard piles. The vintage copper pots that had hung above the stove for decades were stacked carelessly on the floor. They were going to throw these away, I realized, picking up one of my grandmother's hand-painted mugs. All of it. Julia surveyed the room with a lawyer's calculating eye. This goes beyond taking liberties with property management. This is a deliberate attempt to alter the property without the owner's consent. We need to document everything. We spent the next hour photographing the kitchen, the contractor's plans, and the items that had been slated for disposal. Julia made several phone calls, to a locksmith, to her office, and finally to a security company. By late afternoon, new locks had been installed on all the doors, and a security system was scheduled for installation the following day. Now, Julia said, setting her laptop on the dining room table, let's look at exactly what's been happening with this property. Using her legal access as a state executor, Julia pulled up the financial records for the beach house. What we found was infuriating. While my father had indeed been paying the property taxes and basic maintenance from the trust as stipulated, Eleanor had begun inserting herself into the management over the past year. Look at these expenses, Julia pointed to several large charges. Interior design consultation, architectural plans, landscaping design. None of these are necessary maintenance costs. They're preparation for major renovations. Can she do that? Use the trust money for those things? Absolutely not. These expenses should never have been approved. Julia scrolled further. And look here. They've been listing the property as their secondary residence on some documents. There's even a utility bill in Eleanor's name. She's been establishing a paper trail, I realized, the full extent of her plan becoming clear. Making it look like they have some kind of ownership stake. Exactly, it's deliberate and calculated. Julia closed her laptop. Rebecca, I think we need to take more serious steps to protect your inheritance. I'd like to petition the court to revoke your father's limited financial authority over the property. The suggestion hit me hard. It would mean legally separating my father from the last connection he had to my mother's family. It would formalize the breach that Eleanor had created between us. Would that make him hate me? I asked, suddenly feeling like a child again. Julia's expression softened. This isn't about punishment, Rebecca. It's about protection. Your mother and grandparents wanted this house to remain yours. If we don't act now, Eleanor will find another way to try to take it. That evening we ordered pizza and sat on the back deck, watching the sunset over the ocean. The familiar rhythm of the waves against the shore soothed some of the day's tension, but my mind kept circling back to one painful question. Why didn't he protect me from her, Julia? Why didn't Dad see what was happening? Julia was quiet for a long moment. Your father has always been a follower, not a leader. Catherine knew that about him, and loved him anyway. She was the strong one, the one who made decisions and stood firm. When she died, Julia sighed. He was adrift. Eleanor stepped into that vacuum with her certainty and dominance, and he latched onto her like a lifeline. But I'm his daughter. Doesn't that count for anything? It counts for everything, sweetheart, but grief and loneliness can distort people's thinking. Eleanor offered him a ready-made family to replace what he'd lost. She made him feel taken care of when he was at his most vulnerable. Julia reached over to squeeze my hand. It doesn't excuse his failure to protect you, but it might help explain it. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That night, I slept in my childhood bedroom at the beach house, surrounded by memories of happier summers. The room was exactly as I'd left it last spring break. Seashells collected over years displayed on the windowsill, faded posters on the walls, a stack of dog-eared paperbacks beside the bed. Eleanor hadn't managed to erase me here. Not yet. I woke to the sound of my phone ringing. It was my father, his voice tight with anxiety. "Rebecca, what have you done?" The contractors called Eleanor saying they couldn't complete the kitchen renovation because you claimed to own the property. "I do own the property, Dad." "You know that." "This is ridiculous. We arranged those renovations for the benefit of the whole family. The kitchen is outdated." "It's my kitchen and I like it exactly as it is. Grandma designed it herself." He made a frustrated sound. "You're being sentimental about appliances from the 1990s. Eleanor has excellent taste. And this isn't about taste, Dad. It's about the fact that you and Eleanor were planning major changes to my property without my knowledge or consent. Changes that would have erased one of the few places I have left that still holds memories of Mom and Grandma. That's not fair. We were trying to surprise you with an updated, 'Stop lying to me.'" The force of my own voice surprised me. "You were planning to have the renovations completed before I even knew about them. The contractor told us everything. And Julia found the records of all the unauthorized expenses you've been charging to the trust." A long silence followed. When he spoke again, his voice was different. Defensive, almost sullen. "Eleanor thought it would be better to present you with the finished project. You've been so resistant to any changes she suggests. Because her suggestions always involve erasing Mom. She got rid of the roses, the piano, the family photos, and now she's trying to take my beach house too." "No one is taking anything," he insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. "The house is still in your name." "But for how long? Julia found utility bills in Eleanor's name. She found documents where you've listed the property as your secondary residence. What's next, Dad? Were you planning to have me sign something during the family reunion? Something that would transfer ownership to you and Eleanor?" His silence was damning. "Dad?" I pressed, my throat tight with unshed tears. "Was that the plan?" Eleanor thought, "Given your age and financial inexperience, it might be better if the property was managed by her?" I finished, disbelief coloring my voice. "The woman who's been systematically removing every trace of Mom from our lives? The woman who told you to get rid of Mom's piano without even asking me? That's not fair, Becca. Eleanor has been nothing but welcoming to you." The absurdity of his statement might have made me laugh if it wasn't so painful. "Welcoming? She's treated me like an unwanted house guest in my own home. She's excluded me from family decisions. She's talked over me, dismissed me, and now she's trying to take my inheritance." "You're exaggerating. Eleanor only wants what's best for our family." "Her family, Dad. Not mine." She made that very clear. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what needed to be said. "Julia is filing paperwork today to revoke your financial authority over the Beach House Trust. From now on, I'll be handling all aspects of the property management myself." "You're what?" His shock was genuine. "Rebecca, that's completely unnecessary. I've always managed the finances responsibly. Until Eleanor came along. The trust wasn't meant to fund her vision for a vacation home. It was meant to maintain my inheritance until I was ready to take full control. Well, I'm ready now." "You can't do this," he said, but there was uncertainty in his voice. "You're only 20. I'm old enough to own property, old enough to manage my inheritance, and old enough to recognize when I'm being manipulated. Julia has all the documentation, Dad. Eleanor has been using you to try to take what's rightfully mine." "That's ridiculous," he sputtered, but without conviction. "Eleanor would never—" "Ask her," I challenged. Ask her directly if she was planning to have ownership of the beach house transferred to both of you during the reunion. Watch her face when you ask, Dad. Really look at her for once." The line went quiet except for his breathing. When he spoke again, his voice was subdued. "What happens now? Now I protect what's mine. The locks have been changed. A security system is being installed today. I'll be staying here for the remainder of the summer to oversee some genuine maintenance work that's been neglected. And the family reunion? There won't be one. Not here. This is my home, not a venue for Eleanor to play hostess with her family while continuing to push me out of mine." "Becca, please. Can't we discuss this reasonably? Eleanor has put so much effort into planning. She can plan it somewhere else. My decision is final." After hanging up, I sat on the back deck for a long time, watching the waves and trying to process the magnitude of what had just happened. I had stood up to my father for the first time in my adult life. I had reclaimed my property and, in a larger sense, my autonomy. The security company arrived mid-morning to install the new system. By afternoon, the house was secure, with cameras monitoring all entrances and an alert system that would notify both me and a local security firm of any unauthorized entry attempts. Julia returned from her meetings with renewed purpose. "The paperwork has been filed," she confirmed. "I've also notified the property tax office and all utility companies that you are the sole owner and decision-maker for this property. Any future bills or correspondence will come directly to you." "Thank you," I said, the full weight of my new responsibilities settling on my shoulders. What happens if they fight this? They could contest it in court, but they'd lose. The documentation is clear, and Eleanor's attempts to establish a claim on the property through deception won't hold up to legal scrutiny. Julia squeezed my shoulder reassuringly. "This is your house, Rebecca. Your mother and grandparents made sure of that." Later that afternoon, my phone exploded with messages. Eleanor had apparently discovered that her renovation plans had been thwarted, and she was furious. Her texts escalated from demanding explanations to making thinly veiled threats. "Your father is devastated by your betrayal," one message read. "Is this how you honor your mother's memory? By tearing apart what's left of your family?" I didn't respond to any of her messages, which only seemed to inflame her further. Eventually, my father called again. "Eleanor is extremely upset," he began without preamble. "She says you've humiliated her in front of her family by canceling the reunion without notice." "I didn't cancel it without notice, Dad. I told you this morning it wasn't happening. And it's not my responsibility to provide Eleanor with a venue to impress her family. This vindictiveness isn't like you, Becca. Standing up for myself isn't vindictiveness. It's self-respect. Something I should have learned from Mom but had to figure out on my own instead." His sharp intake of breath told me the barb had hit its mark. "Your mother would never have wanted to see our family fractured like this. Our family was fractured the moment you let Eleanor start erasing Mom from our home. It was fractured when you stood by while she pushed me to the margins of your life. It was fractured when you conspired with her to take control of my inheritance." "I never conspired." "Then what would you call it, Dad? What would you call planning unauthorized renovations to my property? What would you call establishing a paper trail to make it seem like you and Eleanor have an ownership stake in my beach house?" His silence spoke volumes. "I'm not doing this to hurt you," I said, softening my tone slightly. "I'm doing it to protect myself and what's rightfully mine. If you want to rebuild our relationship, it starts with respecting my boundaries and my property rights." "And Eleanor?" "Eleanor has made her feelings about me abundantly clear. I don't expect or want a relationship with someone who's actively tried to erase me from my father's life." After hanging up, I felt both drained and strangely empowered. For so long, I had accommodated Eleanor's reign over our family dynamics, retreating further into myself with each new erosion of my mother's memory. Now I had drawn a line, clear, firm, and legally enforceable. That evening, Julia and I sat on the beach watching the stars emerge over the Atlantic. The rhythm of the waves provided a soothing backdrop to our conversation as we discussed practical next steps. I would need to establish a new bank account specifically for the beach house expenses. I would need to find a reliable local handyman for regular maintenance. I would need to create a system for managing the property from a distance during the school year. You know, Julia said thoughtfully, your mother would be incredibly proud of you right now. Not just for protecting your inheritance, but for finding your voice. I wish she was here, I admitted, drawing patterns in the sand with my fingertips. She would have known how to handle Eleanor from the beginning. Maybe, Julia smiled, but then you wouldn't have discovered your own strength. Catherine always said you were stronger than you realized. Today proved her right. As we walked back to the house under the vast canopy of stars, I felt a sense of peace settling over me. The beach house was secure. My inheritance was protected. And most importantly, I had finally broken free from the pattern of appeasement and avoidance that had defined my relationship with Eleanor, and, by extension, my father. I couldn't change the past 2 years of gradual erasure. I couldn't undo the hurt of watching my father choose Eleanor's vision for our family, over honoring my mother's memory. But I could secure my future. I could preserve this piece of my heritage that connected me to my mother and grandparents. Eleanor had spent years trying to make me disappear. Instead, she had inadvertently forced me to become more visible, more assertive, more determined to claim my rightful place in the world. In her relentless effort to erase my existence, she had made me impossible to ignore. Little did I know that this was only the beginning of her reckoning and my reclamation. The next morning, I awoke to the sound of waves and a newfound sense of purpose. The beach house felt different now. Not just a repository of memories, but a symbol of my independence. As I made coffee in my grandmother's kitchen, the kitchen I had saved from Eleanor's modernizing ambitions, I noticed a small, framed cross-stitch hanging beside the window that I'd somehow never paid much attention to before. It read, "The smallest act of courage changes everything." My grandmother had stitched it herself decades ago. How fitting that I would notice it now, just when I needed its wisdom most. My phone buzzed with a text from Julia, hearing scheduled for next week regarding financial authority. Be prepared for pushback from your father's attorney. So it had begun. Eleanor wouldn't surrender easily. That much was certain. I replied with a simple, "I'm ready," and realized with some surprise that I meant it. I spent the morning continuing the cleanup work in the kitchen, carefully returning my grandmother's dishes and cookware to their proper places. As I worked, I thought about the future of this house. My house. For too long, I'd been a passive visitor, treating it as a pleasant vacation spot rather than a responsibility and an asset. That needed to change. Taking out a notebook, I began sketching plans. The roof would need replacing within the next few years. The back deck could use reinforcement. The ancient water heater should probably be upgraded to something more efficient. These were the kinds of practical improvements that honored the property's integrity while ensuring its longevity. Not Eleanor's cosmetic renovations designed to erase its history and character. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Around noon, a car pulled into the driveway. Through the kitchen window, I watched with growing apprehension as my father emerged alone. He stood for a moment looking at the house, shoulders slumped, before slowly approaching the front door. The doorbell rang, but I didn't immediately answer. Part of me wanted to hide, to avoid the confrontation that was surely coming. But I reminded myself of my grandmother's cross-stitch. The smallest act of courage changes everything. I walked to the door and opened it. "Hello, Dad." He looked older somehow, the lines around his eyes deeper than they had been just days before. "Rebecca," he said quietly. "May I come in?" I hesitated, then stepped aside. He entered, glancing around as if seeing the place for the first time. "It looks exactly the same," he murmured, running his hand along the back of my grandfather's reading chair. Catherine's parents never changed a thing in all the years they owned it. "That's why I love it," I said, still standing by the door. "It connects me to them, to Mom." He nodded, his eyes lingering on a photograph of my mother as a teenager, standing proudly beside a sandcastle on the beach behind the house. Eleanor doesn't understand that kind of attachment. She believes in constant renewal, in moving forward rather than preserving the past. There's a difference between moving forward and erasing what came before, I said. Mom deserves to be remembered, not replaced. Dad sank into the reading chair, suddenly looking exhausted. I never intended to replace your mother, Becca. No one could ever replace Catherine. But you let Eleanor remove every trace of her from our home. You let her redecorate, discard Mom's things, change everything that made our house ours. I thought it would be easier, he admitted, not meeting my eyes. Easier to start fresh than to be surrounded by reminders of what I'd lost. Eleanor seemed so confident about what needed to be done, and I was adrift. His use of the same word Julia had used to describe him struck me. Perhaps they both saw something in my father that I had been too hurt to recognize. A fundamental lack of direction. A need to be led. What about what I lost, Dad? Mom was my whole world too. And then suddenly she was gone, and you were letting this stranger remake our home like Mom had never existed. I failed you, he said simply. There's no excuse for it. I was so consumed by my own grief that I couldn't see past it to yours. And by the time I started to emerge from the fog, Eleanor had. He trailed off. Had what, Dad? Taken control of everything? Pushed me to the sidelines? Started planning to take my inheritance too? He flinched at the directness of my words. She presented it differently. She said we were creating a new family legacy. That the beach house could be our family's gathering place for generations to come, her children, her grandchildren someday. But not me? Not my future children? Of course you too, he insisted, but without conviction. Eleanor just thought, given your age and your career focus, you might not have the same attachment to the property. That you might prefer the financial benefit of selling it eventually. The calculated nature of Eleanor's strategy became even clearer. She had been carefully constructing a narrative about me to my father, that I was too young, too career-focused, too detached from family traditions to truly value the beach house. In her version, selling the property or transferring ownership to them would be doing me a favor. Did you ever once ask me how I felt about this place? I challenged. Did you ever consider that this house is one of the few connections I have left to Mom, to her parents, to our family before Eleanor? Dad's silence was answer enough. Eleanor doesn't hate you, he finally said, though I hadn't suggested she did. She just doesn't understand your attachment to the past. She thinks it's holding you back. It's not her place to decide what holds me back or pushes me forward. She's not my mother. She's not even someone who's tried to understand me. I sat on the couch across from him, determined to make him see the truth. Dad, have you ever noticed that Eleanor only includes me when it's absolutely necessary? That every family activity somehow happens when I have other commitments? That she talks about, the kids, meaning her children, and Rebecca, meaning me, like I'm in a completely different category? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Something flickered across his face. Recognition, perhaps, or the dawning of an uncomfortable realization. I never thought of it that way. Of course not. She's careful to maintain plausible deniability. Nothing so overt that you'd have to confront it. Just 1,000 tiny cuts that bleed me out of the family picture. He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving around the room as if searching for answers in the familiar surroundings. Julia filed the paperwork yesterday, he finally said, to revoke my financial authority over the property. Yes. Eleanor is furious. She says you've humiliated her in front of her family and friends, that she'll have to explain why the reunion is canceled, why the kitchen renovation isn't happening. I'm not responsible for the stories Eleanor tells to save face, I replied evenly. She's the one who tried to renovate property that doesn't belong to her. She's the one who planned a family reunion at a house she doesn't own without consulting the actual owner. She says it will affect my standing with her family, that they'll see me as weak for allowing my daughter to undermine my authority. There it was, the crux of Eleanor's control. She had created a dynamic where my father's relationship with her hinged on his willingness to subordinate his relationship with me. His authority over me had become a test of his worthiness in her eyes. Is that what matters? To you, Dad? How Eleanor's family perceives your authority? More than how you failed to protect what Mom wanted for me? He looked pained. It's not that simple, Becca. Eleanor and I are married. Her family is my family now. We have a life together that you're only peripherally part of because you're away at college. His words stung with their brutal honesty. I was peripheral to his new life, a fact I had known but had never heard stated so plainly before. So that's it? I asked quietly. You've chosen your new family over your daughter? That's not what I'm saying. He stood abruptly, pacing the small living room. I'm trying to maintain both relationships. I'm trying to be a good husband to Eleanor and a good father to you. Why does it have to be either or? It doesn't, I said, surprised by the calmness in my voice. It never did, but Eleanor has made it either/or. She's the one who's been systematically pushing me out of your life. She's the one who's been erasing Mom's memory from our home. She's the one who tried to take control of my inheritance. Dad stopped pacing, his back to me as he stared out the window toward the ocean. What do you want from me, Rebecca? It was a simple question with a complicated answer. What did I want? The return of the father who had taught me to ride a bike, who had built sandcastles with me on the beach, who had promised my mother he would always protect me? That man seemed irretrievably lost. I want you to see what's happening, I finally said. Really see it. I want you to stop enabling Eleanor's campaign to erase me from your life. I want you to honor Mom's memory and her wishes for my inheritance. Most of all, I want you to be my father again, not just Eleanor's husband. He turned to face me, his eyes suspiciously bright. I don't know if I can be what you need anymore, Becca. I don't know if I'm strong enough to stand up to Eleanor the way you have. His admission broke my heart even as it confirmed what I had already begun to suspect. My father, once my protector, had become someone who needed protection himself, from his own weakness, from Eleanor's manipulation, from the consequences of choices he had made in grief and loneliness. Then at least don't work against me, I said softly. Don't sign anything Eleanor puts in front of you regarding this property. Don't let her use you to try to take what Mom left me. He nodded slowly. I can do that much. He hesitated, then added, Eleanor wants me to contest Julia's petition in court. She says we can prove that you're not financially responsible enough to manage the property. And what do you think, Dad? Am I irresponsible? No, he said with surprising firmness. You've always been the most responsible person I know. Even as a child, you were more organized and focused than most adults. Then don't contest the petition. Let me take full control of what's rightfully mine. He seemed to be waging some internal battle, torn between conflicting loyalties. Finally, he nodded. All right, I won't fight it. But Rebecca, this will change things between Eleanor and me. She won't forgive what she'll see as a betrayal. That's between you and her, I said, unwilling to take responsibility for the consequences of Eleanor's actions. But maybe ask yourself why your wife would want to take property from your only child. Why she would see your support of my inheritance as a betrayal of her. He had no answer for that. We sat in silence for several minutes, the only sound the distant crash of waves against the shore. It was my father who finally broke the silence. I brought something for you, he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He withdrew a small velvet pouch and handed it to me. I found it in Catherine's jewelry box last night. I think she would want you to have it now. I opened the pouch and tipped its contents into my palm. A delicate gold chain spilled out, bearing a small pendant, a tiny gold shell identical to the ones that washed up on the beach behind the house. Mom's necklace. I whispered, tears filling my eyes. I thought it was lost. Eleanor found it when we were redecorating the master bedroom, Dad explained. She put it away for safekeeping, but I think perhaps she didn't intend to give it to you. The admission cost him visibly. It was perhaps the first time he had explicitly acknowledged one of Eleanor's acts of erasure. Thank you for bringing it to me, I said, fastening the chain around my neck. The small gold shell rested against my collarbone, a tangible connection to my mother that no one could take away. My father stood to leave. I should get back. Eleanor will be wondering where I've gone. I walked him to the door, unsure what to say. The conversation had changed something between us, but I couldn't yet tell if it was for better or worse. As he stepped onto the porch, he turned back. "Rebecca," he said hesitantly, "would it be all right if I came by tomorrow? There's a loose board on the back deck that needs fixing." I noticed it when I arrived. It was such a small thing, a father offering to make a repair at his daughter's house. Yet in that moment, it felt like the first tentative step toward rebuilding something that had been broken for a very long time. "I'd like that," I said. "The toolbox is still in the hall closet." He nodded, a ghost of a smile crossing his face. I remember. After he left, I sat on the porch swing, absently touching the shell pendant at my throat. The confrontation I had been dreading had happened, and though it hadn't resolved everything, it had cleared the air in ways I hadn't expected. My father had seen, truly seen, what Eleanor had been doing. He had chosen not to contest my claim to the beach house. He had returned a piece of my mother to me. Small victories, perhaps, but significant ones. The next day brought both challenges and unexpected support. Eleanor, true to form, escalated her campaign. She called the property tax office trying to dispute my ownership. She contacted the utility companies attempting to keep service in her name. She even called several neighbors, spinning a tale about my mental instability and inability to manage the property. Each attempt was rebuffed, thanks to Julia's thorough legal preparation. By afternoon, Eleanor had shifted tactics, flooding my phone with alternating messages of fury and fake concern. "Your father is devastated by your selfishness," one text read, followed minutes later by, "We're only trying to help you avoid the burden of property management at such a young age." I didn't respond to any of them, which only seemed to inflame her further. The final message came just before dinner. "You'll regret making an enemy of me, Rebecca. I can make things very difficult for you and that precious beach house." It was the closest she had come to an explicit threat. I forwarded the message to Julia, who advised documenting everything but not engaging directly. My father arrived as promised to fix the loose board on the deck. He worked silently, methodically, the rhythm of his hammer a comforting sound from my childhood. When he finished, he did something unexpected. He walked around the entire property, making notes on a small pad. "The gutters need cleaning," he said when he returned to the porch where I was reading, "and there's some wood rot starting on the north side window frames. If you'd like, I could come back next weekend and take care of those things." "I'd appreciate that," I said carefully, not wanting to read too much into the offer. "But what about Eleanor? Won't she be upset if you're helping me?" He sighed, sitting heavily on the porch steps. "Eleanor and I had a long discussion last night. I told her I wouldn't contest your right to manage the property. I told her I thought she had been unfair to you since we married." "How did she take it?" "Not well," he admitted. "She accused me of choosing you over her, of undermining her position in our family. She said some things about your mother that I won't repeat." The muscle in his jaw tightened, a rare display of anger from my typically conflict-avoidant father. I realized something, Rebecca. I've spent 2 years trying to keep peace by giving Eleanor whatever she wants. I've compromised everything. My relationship with you, my memories of Catherine, my own integrity. And it's never enough. There's always something else she wants, someone else to blame for her unhappiness. It was the most insight I'd ever heard from him about his marriage to Eleanor. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet," he said honestly. "But I do know I'm not going to help her take what rightfully belongs to you, and I'm not going to let her erase your mother's memory anymore." It wasn't everything, but it was something. The first time since my mother's death that my father had drawn a boundary with Eleanor on my behalf. The weeks that followed brought significant changes. True to his word, my father returned each weekend to help with repairs and maintenance. Our conversations were still sometimes awkward, the weight of the past 2 years hanging between us, but we were rebuilding something. Not what we had lost, but something new. Eleanor's attempts to assert control over the beach house continued, but with decreasing effectiveness. She filed a formal complaint with the property tax office claiming my father had been paying the taxes and should therefore have equity in the property. The claim was quickly dismissed when Julia produced documentation of the trust fund specifically established to cover those expenses. More seriously, Eleanor tried to claim that some of the furniture and decor in the beach house had been purchased by her and should be returned. This too was rebuffed when Julia demonstrated that every item in question had either belonged to my grandparents or had been purchased with trust funds, not personal money. By mid-August, a new normal had established itself. My father continued his weekend visits to the beach house, always alone. We worked together on small improvement projects and occasionally shared meals, our conversations gradually becoming less strained. He never directly discussed the state of his marriage, but subtle changes told their own story. The wedding ring no longer on his finger, the increasing number of personal belongings he brought with him each visit, the way he began to refer to Eleanor rather than we. One evening, as we sat on the back deck watching the sunset, he finally broached the subject. "I've moved out," he said simply. "I'm staying in a rental apartment while we figure things out." I nodded, unsurprised yet still somewhat shocked to hear it confirmed. "Because of the beach house?" "No," he said thoughtfully. "The beach house was just the catalyst. This has been coming for a long time. I just couldn't see it until you forced me to look. What happens now?" "I don't know," he admitted. "Divorce, probably. Eleanor isn't someone who compromises or forgives what she sees as betrayal. And I'm not willing to sacrifice my relationship with you anymore. I've done enough damage there already." "It's not too late, Dad," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "For us, I mean. We can still fix things." He smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes for the first time in years. "I'd like that very much." As summer drew to a close and I prepared to return to college, I made arrangements for the beach house. A local property management company would handle routine maintenance. A security service would monitor the property. And my father would have a key, not as a financial manager or co-owner, but simply as my father, welcome to visit whenever he wished. On my last day, I stood on the beach watching the waves and reflecting on all that had changed in a single summer. I had arrived feeling erased, marginalized, and powerless. I was leaving with a clear sense of my own strength, my boundaries firmly established, and a renewed relationship with my father. Eleanor had spent 2 years systematically removing every trace of my mother from our lives, trying to remake our family in her image. In the process, she had inadvertently forced me to claim my mother's legacy more firmly than ever before. The beach house stood as a testament to that legacy, unchanged, undamaged, still bearing the imprints of 3 generations of women who had loved it. My grandmother's cross-stitch wisdom had proven true. The smallest act of courage changes everything. My refusal to surrender my inheritance had rippled outward, challenging the false narrative Eleanor had constructed, and ultimately revealing the truth about her intentions not just to me, but to my father as well. As I walked back to the house, shell pendant at my throat and sand between my toes, I realized that Eleanor had failed in her ultimate goal. Far from erasing my existence, her actions had made me impossible to ignore. In trying to diminish me, she had only highlighted my resilience. In attempting to steal my inheritance, she had pushed me to claim it more decisively than I might have otherwise. Sometimes, the very people who try to destroy us end up being the catalysts for our strongest self-definition. Eleanor had wanted to remove all traces of my mother's family from our lives. Instead, she had ensured that I would honor and preserve that legacy with even greater determination. The beach house would remain what my mother and grandparents had intended, a place of memory, continuity, and belonging. No amount of renovation could erase the history embedded in its walls. No attempt at appropriation could sever my connection to it. It was, and would always be, the physical embodiment of my right to exist fully in the world, to take up space, to preserve what matters. Eleanor had hated my existence because it reminded her that she was not the first, not the original, not the only influence in my father's life. She had tried to make me regret standing up for myself, for my mother's memory, for my inheritance. Instead, I had made her regret her own hubris and believing she could simply erase what came before her. Standing on the porch of my beach house, key firmly in hand and future stretching before me, I knew with absolute certainty that I had reclaimed not just my property but my place in the world. Eleanor's reign of erasure was over. My story and my mother's would continue, remembered, honored, and protected. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.